What up, Muggles? This is Fyrebyrd, and I'm here with Ridgeback, and you're listening to The Dusty Cauldron, where we talk about all things Harry Potter and the witchy world at large.
Hooah!
Today we're going to do Did Skeeter Write This episode, and the theme of it is going to be the lack of core education in Harry Potter. We're going to talk a lot about the lack of education leading up to going to Hogwarts, but we'll dabble a little bit with the lack of formal education after Hogwarts as well. So the premise really is ultimately they're expected to show up to school knowing how to read, knowing how to write, how to do maths, understanding geography, but there's no public pre-wizarding school. There's no like standard requirements. People aren't testing to get into Hogwarts. It's like you're just kind of on the register once you are born to a wizarding parent or are somehow known to be a muggle-born. That's never really discussed in the series how they figure that out. That's questionable. And then it's irritating to see things where like Snape will be really upset that students are bad at spelling or he doesn't like how their essays are written. Who taught them? Like, realistically, if you are not going to take the time to tell them this is how you write an essay and this is the standard or style in which I want them written in my class, like, where do you have any right to be upset about what the homework looks like when it comes into you?
That's fair. I think that's really fair. Maybe it's something with like Professor X and Cerebro, where it's like when a baby wizarding person is born, it like sets off some kind of flare or something, or in some kind of little room that they don't talk about.
But then realistically, like let's say it's that, or like the magical quill that puts down students for Hogwarts, registers them, whatever. Mm-hmm. Why are we waiting until they turn 10 to tell them that they are magical and stuff? Like, we're springing it on their parents when pretty soon they're going to need to leave and go to school. Why don't you go see them as soon as you know? And so you deal with the fact that they're going to have accidental magic popping up while they're at daycare and stuff like that. Like, it just seems like bad government, bad parenting, bad teaching. Like,
maybe wizarding babies are terrible from ages 1 through 9. It's not just the terrible 2s. It's terrible everything up until teens.
So you have to avoid them.
Yeah. So they don't even want to deal with them. They're like farting magic. And like they're blowing pixie dust out of their butt and stuff. And it's just annoying. You got to wait until about after they hit 10 and they're like, their body settles down and goes, oh, wait, this is a part of me. I'm okay now.
But now imagine that as a muggle parent and your muggle-born wizard is just farting pixie dust. Like, what do you do with that? You're like, okay, my child is possessed by a demon. Like,
Can you imagine if you're muggle-born, like you said, and you have those issues, are you taking them to the doctor? And are you not releasing information into the world about magic when you have babies farting pixie dust? And maybe they're just levitating on their own, or maybe like part of them turned into another animal. And then American doctors are going to take that and go like, oh, we need to find a cure. There's a pill for that.
Have you tried losing weight?
Oh, I hate that. Clearly that's the problem. Have you tried losing weight?
Right. So there's like, let's look at what sort of core education is happening leading up to Hogwarts. Like, some families maybe are sending their kids to Muggle primary school, and some are homeschooling or hiring a tutor, maybe. Like, I believe that Draco Malfoy had tutors. Like, I would believe that. I think, now I'm not sure if I ever read this in fan fiction or if I read it in the series. I think Molly taught the Weasleys before they went to school. But again, like, if you're going to have where there's no standardization to the education, you need to have standardized testing to like make sure someone is ready to join like an organized school and is going to be able to understand the material. Because if you have a family that has always homeschooled and you're working off of the knowledge of someone that was always homeschooled, like, you have no clue what is in the curriculum, what isn't in the curriculum, what the parent does or doesn't understand and is therefore able to explain to their child.
Which is probably fine if you're a pureblood, or even like half and half, because somebody knows and can prep them. But if you're Muggle-born, that kid has no advantages. That kid is on the bottom of everything, coming to everything late, doesn't know a thing.
The only thing we can give
brutal.
them is they probably do know how to do math and write an essay and stuff like that. I don't know what we can count on for anybody else.
They show up to Hogwarts and go, "Hey, who's got a phone?" I'm like, "Pardon me, what?
What's a phone?
I want to send a text message to somebody."
Well, that's like
Let's hold a Zoom meeting on this.
Arthur. God, I can't talk. Arthur
yeah.
is always like, I'll call you on the felly tone. Like, oh, Jesus.
Felitone is a way better name, though.
Yeah, we should have named
Let's
it
be
that.
true. That's great.
I did look up a couple quotes from the universe about this whole issue. And at one point, the universe did say they can either go to Muggle primary school or they're educated at home. The Weasleys are taught by Mrs. Weasley. That's where I got it. It may not be in the series, but the universe did cite that.
Okay, that makes sense.
And another time it was said that they are, as most of you have guessed, most often home educated with very young children, as you glimpse at the wizard camps before the Quidditch World Cup in the Goblet of Fire. There's a constant danger that they're going to use magic in some way that could inadvertently or deliberately be used, and inadvertently or deliberately be revealing that they are magical, so they can't exactly be trusted to keep their abilities hidden. So putting them into a Muggle primary school is a pretty big gamble. Even Muggleborns like Harry and Hermione attract unwelcome attention at Muggle school by, like, he regrows his hair overnight. That one time, ultimately, I think he apparated. Like, he's running from Dudley and he jumps behind the dumpsters and he jumps onto the roof of the school. Like, obviously, we don't think the kid has mad hops. Like, he apparated. But, so there's issues with putting them in Muggle school. But, I don't know, without having something standardized, I don't love the idea of we just homeschool everybody. And I'm not trying to crap on homeschoolers. But at least in America, even homeschoolers have a standardized curriculum. And if you want to join another educational institution, you have to pass tests to prove that you have enough knowledge to be there. That's not the case here, so that's really weird, in my opinion. I think there's some sense in not having formal school, since there's only, like, small pockets of wizarding families around the country, and sending, like, a 4-year-old to boarding school would be insane. But I think that there should be some sort of standard education requirements at the bare minimum. So, like, oh yeah, we're going to teach them at home, or we're going to send tutors to them, whatever. Maybe the materials are provided by the ministry, something. I just think that there should be an actual, like, standardized, here's what you should understand when you're 7, and here's what you should understand when you're 10. That makes it constant, and I think it would combat the very unrounded education between different households. I think classism comes into this a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Because someone from pure blood, like, long lineage family that has a lot of money is probably going to ultimately end up being more intelligent than somebody who is down on their means, because they have access to an educated adult to educate this child and give them, like, personalized one-on-one attention. And the person without money has to do it all themselves and doesn't have the same, like, academic contacts that the tutor would have, hasn't gone really to any formal education, because as we see, there's very little offered in the wizarding world, at least once you graduate Hogwarts. Like, Muggleborns are probably a lot more likely to go from Hogwarts to, like, Muggle University and extend their education. And I think it would be interesting if they were then the ones that become tutors, and then they're tutoring the purebloods. But we could get really in the weeds on that.
I like that idea. I like that a lot. And the thing, like, it is, I see where you're coming from with the classism too. I mean, like, because you have these kids, purebloods, they come from rich families, they've got access to everything. Just like you were saying. And in as we've seen just in the real world, like, that doesn't always end up with intelligent kids. It just most times ends up with spoiled kids, or kids who don't push themselves.
And you could argue that's true in Harry Potter as well.
Yeah, and vice versa with kids who have nothing. Sometimes you get some of the best students out of that world, but it's just the two extremes. You can get good kids out of that, but it's harder to get good kids out of that because not every kid responds the same. There has to be something around them that gives them that assurance that they can do this. There's so many other factors come into play. With Malfoy, it's like, and him being pure blood rich, money. I had a hard time trying to figure out if he was intelligent or not.
So,
and this may be going off topic a little bit.
Yeah. So this ends up like kind of carrying through the series that he's always like competing for the top spot, and he's pissed that Granger's getting it.
Okay.
And that drives more of his like hatred towards her. So it's more than just, well, my dad says that you're kind or dumb. It's like, I hate that you keep beating me, and I'm getting a lot of shit for the fact that you supposedly should be worse because you're a Muggleborn and you're still beating me. Mm-hmm. So he is intelligent.
Okay, all right. Yeah, in the films, I never really catch he's intelligent. I mean, his emotional intelligence seems like it doesn't exist, and so I'm, with a father like that, that makes a lot of sense.
It's hard to develop emotional intelligence when you're being emotionally abused on a consistent basis. Fair point.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got these people. They don't get a standard education before Hogwarts. They don't really appear to have many options for one after. And they aren't even taught current information on other wizarding societies, on the Muggles, on anything. Like, this is evidenced in Ron at the World Cup is surprised to learn about the other wizarding schools. Like, he knew about one of them because he's like, oh yeah, my brother Bill was a pen pal with a guy in South America. So he like had a vague awareness of this other school. But like, it's Hermione that's giving the education of like, oh, this is Beauxbatons, and oh, these people are from Durmstrang. She leaves out all the other ones, and I think that's because really the universe hadn't decided to place like a magical school on every continent. So she just went with the ones that were going to matter in that book,
sure.
And then it grew the universe beyond that. Shouldn't that have come from Ron? As like, you're the pureblood wizard here. Hermione's educating you on wizarding society. Like, that's telling me that as a society you don't educate your people. It's very insular, and like all that matters is British wizards, and British wizards education, whether or not we believe that to be adequate, that's what is most important. They put like, that's the focus, and we're just not going to talk about what's going on here. And like the very different structures, like the wizarding school in Japan, they wear robes, and like if you start to use dark magic, your robe changes color and everybody knows that you've gone evil. Like, so there's very different structures in these other societies, and like Ron knows nothing about that as far as we can tell. Like, the other wizards aren't talking about that. Like,
well, I guess my question would be, do the Weasleys know about that? Because Mama Weasley is who was teaching, is essentially his teacher going into it, right? So
you would think that they should, because Arthur works for the government and two of her sons work internationally. But that just points back to the same problem I'm talking about, right? Like, if the parent doesn't know it, the parent can't teach it. Therefore, the child doesn't know it. And therefore, the child, when they become a parent, is not going to teach that to their child. And they may teach less because we don't remember everything that we're taught.
Right.
And so you're slowly just reducing the knowledge that's being passed generation to generation because you have no standardized curriculum.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I agree with that. I agree with what you're saying, because now that you say it, it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, because obviously Molly, who's a fantastic mom.
Mm-hmm. And she's a powerful witch.
She's amazing on all fronts. But clearly, she picked and, it's like, and I'm not saying she did it because for any malice. She just went, well, yes, there are other wizarding schools out there. That's not important to what I need to teach Ron. And I think Ron is... I actually think Ron, like me in high school and elementary school, were much more physically active, liking to run around, do stuff. Harder time in the textbooks.
Yeah.
Harder time getting to understand how important a textbook is. And because we start to really see it, at least in the movies later, Ron really develops into like a heck of he's like a Quidditch goalie. It's not goalie. Keeper. Yeah. But he's good. He's like really good. And so he really finds his niche there.
Yeah, but we do know he's smart.
Yeah.
Like, it's talked about he's a great strategist throughout the whole series. And he will crush everybody at chess, which is like demonstrating those tactics. And
which seems to feed back into the athletic side, when you're playing.
Yeah.
Strategies you're devising to defeat an opponent. But he's not like a textbook dude.
Right. But I guess, no, I hear you. I think I didn't explain myself very well, because I was trying to say that, like, he's not academically inclined, but he's intelligent.
Yes.
And I think we see a difference in, like, what would be valued, even as far as learning goes, really between like a Muggleborn and a pureblood by the contrast of Ron and Hermione.
Right.
Obviously, Hermione has always valued education. And part of that is driven by the fact that she had no friends. As someone who didn't have friends when I was very young, I get that. Like, you go to the books because no one's talking to you anyway, right? But so then the more time you spend with books, the more you just grow this desire to have more knowledge. So you take a person with that disposition and then you throw them into a world where they don't know anything and are surrounded by people that like, oh, you didn't know how the Flu Network works? What the heck? I've been using that since I was 2. Like, so she has even more motivation to like, I've got to learn this and I've got to learn what they're teaching in classes and I need to learn how the government works and I need to learn whether or not it's okay for me to do this based on pureblood society. Like, just much more academically inclined.
Yeah.
Whereas Ron hasn't had to work for that base knowledge of the community. And then I don't think it was pushed to be very academically inclined in the Weasley household, particularly with like, I mean, Percy's always getting made fun of for being academically inclined. So then Ron's going to learn, oh, like Fred and George are going to think I'm dumb if I do that. And we already know that he's got like a weak spot for not being the cool one or the favorite one, or like, because everybody had their thing and he didn't feel like he had his thing, which really his thing is that he's very smart and a great strategist, but he's got a lot of emotional blockage going on.
In his grouping with his kids, I mean, you might as well just take away Percy and Bill and leave it as Fred, George, Ron, and Ginny.
Yeah. And
poof, Ron's the middle kid.
Yeah.
And middle kids often have a lot of problems. They don't know who they are. They can't figure out what they're doing. People are very fawning or dealing too much with the older kids or fawning over the baby. So having been a middle kid, I know what that's like, and you feel lost and you don't know who you are at times. So I agree on every aspect. It's like he probably just never got pushed. I mean, good Lord, she had like 2, 4, 6 kids.
Is it 6 or 7? I think Ginny makes 7, doesn't she?
Is Ginny 7? Because there's Fred, George, Bill, Percy, and then Charlie. 7. So that's a lot of kids.
I can't imagine.
Eventually someone's...
I don't even want one kid.
It's not even... it's not even like Molly's. Like I said before, Molly's not a bad mom. It's just, that's a lot of kids.
Molly's a busy mom.
If you have Fred and George...
That's like 6 kids right there.
You're just happy that Ron's not doing something to blow himself up. If Ron's not blowing himself up, Ron's fine.
Yep. It's a valid point. I'm just like going to move on to my next thing because I don't have a good response to that because I agree with you.
Well, no, I'm so far I'm just like on page with you because it like I actually have that experience and know exactly what you're talking about, and yes, that is what happens.
Yeah, fair. So they grow up, honestly, in a massive echo chamber of their parents' values and get some basic spelling and math forced into them at Hogwarts because it's required for the subjects that you're taking to avoid failing. But they still aren't really taught to expand their views or their minds. So, of course, they perpetuate the broken system and they keep creating wizarding wars and all of this because they're not being taught not to. They're not being taught about people that are different than them. They're not being taught to think critically. You could argue that Snape is trying to teach them to think critically because he gets really upset that Hermione seems to just be regurgitating the textbook in his class because there's no critical thinking there and he finds that frustrating. But largely, the teachers want the textbook regurgitated to them, and that's why she's excelling with it. Like, I'm not trying to say she's not smart. But she's not providing a lot of critical thinking in the homework that she's turning in. I think she does think critically, but she doesn't necessarily provide that to the teachers. So she's not challenging any educational theories. She'll challenge views of society, but just not in the classroom. And we're not teaching anyone else to do that. So, of course, we're not going to be changing the system because no one is even being taught that that's an option.
No, you're right. And, you know... Yeah. I was trying to think what I was going to say. I was trying to put in words, and I just went, yeah, don't really disagree.
It's like fluid.
When you're young, you know, and I can only imagine, it's like you just want to fit in some way. So she's doing that. And, you know, story intents and purposes, you know, she's doing it to fulfill whatever plot points the universe wants for her. But it would be, it should be that they start critical thinking and thinking about other things and other ways that they're impacting this, and that other people impact this and do these things, and other people out there and other cultures and other theories.
Yeah. We can even take it a level further. Law, quote unquote, in the Harry Potter universe is practiced on the Wizengamot, which is filled with like the sacred 28 pureblood families, because no one's taught actual law, and then they really can't change anything about it. They are just taking what they have existing and then adapting it to fit their whims. Things, I mean, you can argue that's going on in American government too, so I'm not like calling out necessarily Harry Potter as the only place that does this, but you're taking a person that lacks education on how law should work or even how to write a law, putting them in charge of the entire country to set the laws, and then they set them based on whatever their political gain is at the moment. Like, we see things going in and out of vogue as laws based on who's sitting in the seat at that time, or who's in the minister seat influencing it, or like their undersecretary. Like, all of the anti-werewolf legislation was like pushed through because we had a lot of darker purebloods on the Wizengamot, and we had Umbridge like working as an undersecretary being like, werewolves are going to kill everybody, you have to make it so they can't have jobs and they will be more angry because they're on the outskirts of society, and this won't end badly in any way whatsoever.
So you were talking about the purebloods, and so is it the pureblood families basically have a lot of control over the government?
Yeah, they have like an automatic seat on the Wizengamot. It's like each family has a seat, and then like when the father dies, it goes to the next heir. Like, there's no education requirement to serve on government. There's no vetting process. They're not elected. They just get it because their family is pure.
Oh, how many people serve on that?
I feel like the Wizengamot has 40 people.
And there's 28 pureblood.
Well, so the
families?
Sacred 28 is the ones that like can trace for like forever, that they've never, quote unquote, never had any Muggle lineage. Realistically, I'm sure we've got like someone who was written off and shoved in a cottage out in the country because they're the product of a Muggle and pureblood relationship. But that's the 28 families. There are other families that are like half-bloods at this point because they have intermingled with Muggles that also have seats on the Wizengamot.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, man, if that's just like you have all these people who are literally getting stuff simply because
they were born.
They don't play outside their race
simply because they're inbred.
Yeah, that's no way to run a system of government. That's not how you should do it.
But if you're benefiting from it, and you're benefiting from not educating people on how this happened or how it could be changed, why would you want to give them more education?
That's the
because it could challenge your authority.
It's an age-old question, right? It's like they don't want people to challenge their authority. They like what they're getting, you know. They're getting everything they want. They're happy about it. So exactly like I said, why change it? You know, they're not going to benefit from it. They know someone else is going to benefit from it. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's almost a capitalistic ideal. You know, it's that capitalistic ideal hanging in there by tooth and claw. Like, well, I want more. You know, I don't have enough, and why can't I get it? If I've got the quality, if I am going to get it, why should I give that up? And it's like, because you don't really need it. And you're not really qualified to do it.
Definitely. Medicine, mastery of subjects, anything that is like higher ed, really, is private apprenticeship agreements. There's not like, you can't go to a college to be like, I want to get a mastery in healing so I can go work as the Mungos. You have to get an apprenticeship, which means you get to control who gets the knowledge and who doesn't, and you can be even more controlling than what percentage of pureblood are you, and be like, how deep is your pocket? So it's really bastardized, and it's like questionable at best.
And this is play the other side of the coin here, because again, from where I was saying, that seems just wrong in so many ways. But this is also a community that I don't know how big their population is, but from what I've seen film-wise and what I've read, they definitely don't want anyone else to know about them. So they're controlling all that information too. And I don't know if that's the same across all the schools, but it seems like it might be.
I think, yeah. So it's like the International Confederation of Wizards. I feel like I'm leaving something out of that title, but they have like the international statute of secrecy. So it's not just an England thing. And then it's obviously more important, I think, in other societies where like the witch trials happened. Like we talked in a different episode about how the American Wicks cast silently, and it's not just because like they've learned how, because that's like a skill level you can get to. It's like they had to cast silently so that they don't get murdered.
Right.
But yeah, so I think you could still have a version of higher ed and not be revealing yourself, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to pull off Hogwarts. It's no different. Frankly, you could have them still learning at Hogwarts. They just are attending different classrooms.
And you think they would want them to have some kind of higher ed? One, because they are getting more and more Muggle-born and half-blood kids in there who have these experiences that if you have just pure-blood people teaching, can't relate to them. They have no way to relate to these kids. So they're more likely like to lean towards the pureblood kids or the kids that families are half-bloods but they're very familiar with, So higher ed is even more important.
And I think you could easily end up with a really uncomfortable situation where like a teacher is assuming that a student is not intelligent and is ultimately grading them lower because they are not providing something related to like a given from Wizarding Society that you wouldn't necessarily learn in a textbook. And that has no bearing on that student's intelligence level, but they may not know like certain expectations or like even how the government is supposed to work, or maybe wouldn't understand why a goblin war would break out with wizards based on like this certain thing being said or this certain act not being done, because a pureblood would know, oh no, you have to talk to a goblin in this specific way or you'll start a goblin war, because we have a history within our society and have learned this. How's Hermione supposed to know about that? She's not a part of that society. Like, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, and if anyone's got a chance of actually knowing, it's probably Hermione.
Yeah.
She's probably read it somewhere. But, someone like, in this case, someone like Harry.
Who's not going to go read.
He's not going to know that. He might run into a goblin and say, hey, pal, give me 5. And that goblin, boom, they're at war. Now, we don't do high fives. We do elbow to elbow.
You tried to assault me.
I'm going to kill you.
Or I thought you were trying to take 5 nuts from me. Like,
now I have to kill you, and all my family will kill all your family. And
yeah. Now we have a blood war.
Let's play. So yeah, no, I get that.
It's also, I feel like education is being frowned on because people who experiment with different things are ostracized as weird or labeled as dark or crazy. If you look at Pandora Lovegood, if you look at Luna Lovegood, Xenophilius Lovegood, Snape experimenting with his own magic, it's immediately considered dark. Some of his stuff was dark, but like it's immediately assumed. And then when you look at like taking spells and making them up, like you as the creator know the intent, but the other people don't necessarily, and they get to choose. And more often than not, they're like, oh no, you're making things that are bad because you want to hurt people. Whereas like technically the same thing is happening if someone is like working for the Department of Mysteries and doing like experimental charms work, but because it's government sanctioned, it's not dark. Like we're actively trying to not have people learn new ways to do things or challenge the status quo, because otherwise they're other and other is bad.
Could it be very similar or drawing parallels to maybe early Christianity, where like it was very stringent about what you could and couldn't do, or you had like Spanish Inquisitions, but then you had it branching off, wanting to branch off, people wanting to branch it off and open it up. And it seemed like it was very like, this is the view we have and there's no other view but this view. And that could also be applied to like many different ways people approach things in life. Like certain families go like, no, we do it this way and this is the way we do it. But it made me think of like how Christianity branched off into Episcopalian and Baptist and like all these other things that kind of branched out of it. So I
think
kind of
that's a really interesting idea, and it resonates to me thinking specifically about how Lutheranism came to be, because ultimately Luther thought these are the 99 things that I think that the church is doing wrong, and you could argue that he went a weird way about doing it with nailing them to the door, but ultimately he was like, I'm taking a stand of your current system doesn't work, I want to make it better. And he was totally blasted by the people within the Catholic Church for that. I mean, obviously he survived it because Lutheranism is still a religion, but same concept, right? Mm-hmm. He is trying to do something different. We need to other him. His otherness is bad. You should not follow him because he is evil. Exactly. That kind of thing. So yeah, I actually do think that's a really interesting parallel.
And I feel like that with people like Arthur Weasley out there who are literally experimenting with things, looking at things that they're like, you shouldn't be messing with that. And then there's people like Hermione who I think she becomes a stronger critical thinker. She regardless what happens in the movie, I don't know what happens in the book, I feel like she would have been someone who would have been like a Martin Luther. You know, she would have been someone who said, no, we need to change some things. These things don't work. Because she would have been able to see it. And I feel like there's probably other people in too. Maybe Neville would have been one of those people who have been like, you know, this doesn't work. Because he came from a similar background like Harry did, didn't he? Like he was...
in the sense that he didn't grow up with his parents because of Voldemort. So but different because he was still fully entrenched in the magical community. Okay. Then I'll scratch Neville. But he did seem like kind of one of those people that he eventually, at least in the films, he becomes his own person and would be similar to that. That happens in the books too. He definitely has a great glow up, not just in his physical appearance. Like literally, he becomes the strong, independent man that he should have been the whole time, but he had to grow out of the way that his aunt or grandmother. God, this is terrible.
I thought it was his grandmother.
But he has to grow out of her constantly comparing him to his dad and sizing him up and finding him lacking. Ouch. Finding him lacking for really shitty reasons. Like
that's too bad.
He showed his accidental magic later in life, so then they were assuming he was a squib. And first of all, if your child is a squib, who cares? They're still your child. But again, we have this really inbred you have to be magical or you're not good. And then he ultimately he had his father's wand, so he's learning magic with a wand that was never a wand that chose him. So of course he's not as good as the other people because he has to work harder to try to do it. And then you see a switch where he becomes a stronger wizard after his wand is broken in book 5 and he has to get a new one. And then it's actually a wand that chose him. And suddenly he's much more powerful. So he was powerful the whole time.
So the whole time through books through 1 through 5, he's using his dad's wand?
Yeah.
A wand that didn't choose him?
Yeah.
What? That's not even how you're supposed to do it.
Augusta gave him that wand and then is writing him about not being good enough and then doesn't even recognize her own idiosyncrasies when he gets better because he has a new wand. She's just I'm so proud of you. I'm not going to acknowledge the fact that you were always this good and you had to try twice as hard to be as good as you were, and that because I have stopped handicapping you, you now are demonstrating this skill. It's just you finally are starting to shape up.
That's cold. Yeah, that's cold.
I don't really like her as a character, but I think it's just a further example of the idea that we're going to have levels of who's good and who's not, and it is very classist. And even when they're not bad, the Longbottom family is considered a light family, but still buys into that. If you don't have magic, you are lesser. So if my grandson is a squib, he's a shame on the family. So obviously I'm not saying it, but I clearly don't value muggles and I don't value people coming from that community, whether or not they have come by magic. I'm not going to be one of the really nasty people and say, oh, they stole magic and they have to be exiled from the community. But I obviously have an inherent belief that I am better than them, that I know more than them. And I'm not going to make an effort to teach them the things that I know. There is no class at Hogwarts to try to give the students this knowledge that they wouldn't have because they haven't been a part of the wizarding community until Hogwarts. And there's no other education outside of Hogwarts. So where are they supposed to learn it?
dark places.
I guess, yeah. But then we're going to write
They learn
them
the
off.
wrong stuff.
Yeah. And that just, I think that on the large part, the Hogwarts teachers are good. But at the end of the day, there's no requirements to become a Hogwarts teacher. So it's just a furthering of insular knowledge and could have really biased things to it. Like, obviously, Snape shows a lot of bias.
Status qualifications. Like,
Yeah.
well, you're Gilderoy Lockhart.
Oh, God. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you could have even vetted him because, like, would anyone remembered the fact that he didn't actually do any of that stuff? Or?
Well, they wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Like, it's learned over the course of book 2 that
Right.
he is just really good at memory charms. But I have a harder time making the case on that particular role because no one wants it, right? So I think at a point as an employer, you get to where you literally have to lower your standards because you have no options. So
Yeah.
if we're not vetting that role, I don't like it, but I can give a slight pass. But like for the other roles where there's no curse on it, you should have competition to get it. Why are we not vetting this? Why is there not like a required mastery for the subject? Like, we do know that at least 2 are masters because we hear that like Flitwick is a charms master and Snape is a potions master, but as far as I'm aware, the others are not. Therefore, they didn't even go get an apprenticeship. For all we know, they went directly from being a Hogwarts student to being a Hogwarts teacher. Like,
Right. It doesn't affect the fact that they're really good, but like you said, they're not actual masters.
yeah, and it's like they're in charge of the education that will be given to everybody, and it will be the only education that Witcher Wizard ever receives, unless they can afford an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
I don't get it. It bugs me. Do you have any thoughts on the education system outside of kind of what I was going over?
It was funny. I hadn't thought about it too much. I just I was looking at just some pure story structure, but looking at it critically, it's like it's kind of it's problematic. I mean, there's issues there. I mean, there, Bo Burnham. There's, like, from watching the way Snape treats students, it's like you could get away with that, like, in the 80s. You can't get away with that now. You can't treat students like that. And I think it's very reflective of and doesn't it set in the 80s or something like that, or is it?
No, so the students would have been born in the 80s. It's set in from like 91 to 98.
Okay, so
unless you count the epilogue, then
kind of makes sense. Yeah. I love Snape. I think he's an interesting character, but guy, he's so freaking cruel. He's just mean. Mm-hmm. He would have made me cry. I would have cried. But
I would have gotten detention because I was the kind of student that would talk back to the teacher, and I would have really gotten in a lot of trouble in potions.
My thought on the education system is, I wonder if maybe someone had tried to open up the curriculum at some point, because it seems like the creation of a Dark Lord, the creation of Death Eaters, something like that is something you would create to put people back in line and to stymie outside thought, to me. Because if you start opening up and want to start understanding the world you live in and understand that there's other things in the world you live in and one of the things they're into and stuff, that seems the exact opposite of what they would want. Because everything is so centralized on wizard magic and just being there. It's like with each generation, they're like, they want more. It's like once they figure it out, it's like, but this isn't all there is. Well, we're not going to teach you that. And so the first thing they're going to do is they're going to go looking for it. Mm-hmm. Like we see, how many times are they in the forbidden section? How many times? Because they need the answers. Nobody will give them to them. They go get them. And it's going to happen when they're adults and they're leaving Hogwarts. And with each generation that comes, they do get exposure to the fact that they can pursue more. It doesn't, the older generations were very focused for probably various reasons. We need to protect the wizarding community. If we get caught, we're going to get burned at the stake. We're going to have all these horrible things happen to us. We're going to get tortured. So it worked for a while. But as they kept themselves closed off, they've forgotten that the rest of the world moved on and has changed. And they need that exposure to grow the community, to make the community kind of find new life. Otherwise, you're always going to have like Death Eaters and Dark Lords and these horrible things, schools getting blown up, until you start, as a community, moving forward. You're always going to have a bad guy, but you have a greater chance of lessening the impact of them with more information and more knowledge being gained. That's my thought.
I think that's a really good point. And it's like, I was trying to apply that to Voldemort, and I'm like, I agree and I don't agree.
That's
Like,
fair.
to the one point of being very, like, focused to the wizarding community, I think that that's true of him. But also, he really pushed the bounds of magic. He sought more information and to go further than anyone had gone before, which is very different than what's encouraged in the society. But again, he's labeled dark. Granted, he is. But it probably didn't start out that way.
Right. He just wanted to learn. Maybe, like you said, he just wanted to learn more. And they're so restrictive that, and teenagers, Tom Riddle, he was definitely a teenager, their response to keeping you away is, well, now I want that more. Not all of them are like that. I wasn't like that. Not saying I was a wizard, but I'm not like that. But a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers are. I mean, look around. We were teenagers. A lot of these people, anyone listening to this who was a teenager, obviously, probably goes, yeah, my parents said I couldn't have some. That's the first thing I wanted, because I wanted to know, why couldn't I have it? And I see wizards being like, and we see it in the movies, and I bet we've probably seen the books. No, you're not allowed in there, because worst reason you can give for anything. That is a horrible reason. They want information. That's what they want. They're sponges. They're sucking everything up. There's something I don't know about. Why can't I have that? Well, because. Not a reason. Don't care. Gonna go get it. And then find out, oh, this just blew my arm off. Whoops.
Maybe I should have followed the rules.
I guess this is why.
Yeah. Well, and, I feel like the series even plays with that idea a little bit, because Umbridge tells people that you can't read the article that Harry did or you'll be expelled. So immediately everybody reads it because she told them not to.
Of course.
So yeah, teenagers. I feel like we could do a whole other subject on how teenage hormones impacts the series. But.
Like I said, back when they were all younger and the world was different, telling kids not to do something because you could be killed. But eventually they had to notice that the world outside of Hogwarts and outside the Wizarding World was changing. And that, yeah, they're probably not just going to kill them. Or maybe they still thought they would. Like, we have to protect them because they're still going to get killed. Even though, there's people out there, there's people living their truth out there very loudly. And at some point, some of these younger wizards coming up are going to see that. They're going to have people they were friends with that were living their truth loudly and be like, why aren't we out there? And it's like, well, because they'll kill us. Are you sure?
Are you 100% on
Well, I'll tell you, they'll burn us at the stake. It's like, but wasn't that 400 years ago?
And can't we just cast a spell on fire so it only feels like it's tickling us?
Can't we just talk to them? No.
Talk to you.
No. No.
Yeah.
Gotta keep it all in tight, really tight to ourselves, so that when we get angry, we blow up and we die.
Now you're becoming Catholic. So before we take it back to religion, we've devolved a little bit on society as a whole. I think it's a great conversation, but we devolved. I think ultimately what I'm just trying to say is that there's a real lack of adequate education, particularly before going to Hogwarts, the core subjects that you would need to be successful in life. And that's really frustrating to me.
Yeah, I agree. And on a side note, I just have to apologize because I literally don't know how to use the Segway. So I tend to just jump curbs and run in a different direction out of nowhere when no one's looking. So
I like it.
It does make conversations more interesting. Sometimes hard to keep up with.
Fair enough. I think this will be easy for people to follow, though.
I hope so.
Well, thanks for tuning in. If you're jonesing for more witchy goodness between episodes, you can check us out on Instagram at Dusty Cauldron Podcast, on Facebook at the Dusty Cauldron Podcast Group, via email at dustycauldronpodcast@gmail.com, or check out our website, www.dustycauldronpodcast.com. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening right now. You can even hit the follow button on Spotify now. That's a new feature if you want to do that. Get notifications when we release things. We do release one episode a month. It's always out on the first day of the month. And just remember, education is important, and it is unfortunately slightly lacking in the Harry Potter world. And last but not least, don't forget to stir whatever you've got brewing in your cauldron right now. Bye!